Good evening and welcome to 16 by 9. By all accounts, Kevin and Camillle Runke were a couple in love. They got married in 2013 after a whirlwind 6-month courtship in Winnipeg. But when they split last spring, things took a nasty turn, with stories of stalking and harassment. Camillle got a protection order against Kevin, but the law couldn't keep her safe. And last fall, she was murdered. Tonight, we take a closer look at how the system failed her and if the changes one province is making will be enough to keep women safe.
We're going to be going to Cam's house, like just over the bridge, we call it. I haven't been there since right before she passed away. So it'll be my first time going back.
Jen Noon remembers how important home was to Camillle Runke.
She put a lot of work and energy into it, and she made the house her own.
It was her sanctuary, a place she felt safe in. It didn't stay that way for long.
She never would have thought that she needed like a security camera or anything here until everything started and everything changed with Kevin. They needed like photographic evidence, any kind of video surveillance that they had to catch him in the act.
It's a tragedy that unfolded like so many others.
I mean, I feel like there was so many things that could have happened, and it just seems like the law doesn't work for the victim.
There are a lot of things Camillle loved: her truck, her house, her friends. And in 2013, after 6 months of dating, she loved Kevin Runke and married him.
When I first met them, I thought they were a really nice couple. You know, we chit-chat back and forth. He was funny, you know, he would make jokes.
Their first year was really good together. She told me that their first year was, you know, she would probably describe it as magical.
But soon, there were signs of trouble.
She wanted to believe that this was going to be a good marriage and continue to be. But I know that she had went for a trip in Mexico, and when she came back, she said he was becoming very jealous.
When Camillle caught Kevin cheating, the marriage was over.
And that's when it all just started falling apart, where his behavior had changed.
The breakup was tense, feelings were hurt, and the separation messy. Things quickly turned dark.
Just one thing after another. It just didn't stop. Tried to flood her basement, but she looked out the window and she said she saw him walking away, and she yelled out, "I see you, Kevin." You know, and he looked at her and he walked away.
There was many instances where she would have smashed windows in her truck, slashed tires and nails in her tires.
He cut her brake lines. And when she told me that he cut her brake lines, then I knew it was very, very serious. And you don't go around cutting brake lines if you're not trying to hurt someone.
Camillle called police. Not once, not twice, but 22 times. 22 times she told police Kevin was stalking or harassing her.
How do you turn on the blink of an eye? Was it an act that he was putting on with her this whole time? Was this always his true character?
Kevin's behavior surprised a lot of people, except those who have dated him before.
I'd known him for so long, and why would he do this, and what changed, and it was a bit of disbelief.
This woman, who we're calling Julia, says Kevin treated her like a princess for 2 years. But when she ended the relationship, she says he posted a nude picture of her online and slashed her tires.
The slashing of the tires, I was scared.
Kevin was never arrested. Still, Julia was frightened.
It made me worry that things were escalating more and more. What was going to be next? If it wasn't going to be my vehicle, was it going to be my house? Was it going to be me?
She applied for a protection order, but was denied.
It was terrifying.
In July 2015, Camillle also applied for a protection order against Kevin. This time, the order was granted. On her application, she wrote, "He has a rifle."
And she heard a tapping at the window, and she had gone to the window to look, and all she saw was him standing at that point. And she was pretty 110% sure that he had that gun that she knew about.
Kevin was charged with mischief for flooding her basement, but the behavior continued. Camille's growing fear was obvious in messages to Jen.
Trust me, I've dealt with about 300 police officers since June 13th, but without proof, they can't do a damn thing.
They were frustrated. It's not like that they were brushing her off. I think they took her very seriously, but they couldn't do anything.
Camille thought the protection order would keep her safe.
So the challenge with the Runke case is the nature of what she was calling us for. Largely, they were property-related offenses that had occurred in the middle of the night when no one witnessed them.
That's disturbing stuff, though.
Yeah.
If I'm a woman at home alone and somebody's slashing my tires, yeah, I'm afraid.
He was suspected in them, for sure.
Protection orders were put in place initially because the idea was that women shouldn't have to wait until they got hurt before they got some help from the police.
At this shelter in Selkirk, Manitoba, Anna Pajurski sees hundreds of women who are trying to protect themselves.
They say that, well, she didn't have evidence. Well, that's why protection orders were put in place, so that they didn't need evidence, that police would respond and would take it seriously.
Last year, Manitoba received 1,100 applications for protection orders. Over half were dismissed.
We need to believe the woman when she says what is happening. Is her fear not enough? In Camille's case, she put everything in place that she could put in place to try and protect herself because nobody else was protecting her at that point.
So Camille was left building her fortress. Cameras went up around her home. She got a secret cell phone and told the neighbors to keep watch.
She was like just surrounded by cameras in that house, just sitting there trying to catch him and trying to do something to save herself, and she was scared. She was losing weight. She was getting sick over this.
After every incident, every note, every threat, Camille was frightened. Time after time, she called police. But even with a protection order in place, there was little they could do. If I'm hearing you correctly, it sounds like you're saying your officer's hands were tied.
Well, insofar as they were tied because there wasn't sufficient evidence to charge him. Certainly he was spoken with. He was cautioned numerous times.
He's clearly the one doing this. Everyone knows, and nobody can do anything.
Jen says off-duty police officers would even patrol past Camille's house.
I know of some that were friends with her who would actually come on their own time and just sit outside. They were worried for her.
What does that say about the limitations that some of your officers are up against when it comes to protecting victims of domestic violence?
Well, I guess it strikes a chord that we have to live within the law, and in a case like this one, it would appear that wasn't enough for us.
And I told my mom he's going to kill her. It's going to take something really bad to happen for someone to take it seriously.
Camille was going to change her last name back to LaBerge. She never got that chance.
We just could not have foreseen that it would lead to homicide.
And 4 days later, she was killed.
The early morning hours of Friday, October 30th, Camille was going to work.
It was definitely like a 10-minute drive at the most, like in rush hour. Yeah, I was pretty close to where she lived.
What happened next is unclear. What we do know, someone was waiting for her.
She had shown up for work. She parked her vehicle like where she normally parked, and she had gone to the door, and that's all we know what happened. She was shot.
Struck at close range with a shotgun.
It just makes me angry because I felt, again, like it could have been prevented. He's known to have a gun. He's had restraining orders against him, and one life is lost, like her life is gone.
Kevin was nowhere to be found. Next, changing the law to try to stop the killing.
The firearm ban in the legislation is a result of the actual experience of Camillle Runke.
I think in Camille's case, it wouldn't have made any difference. You can get a gun just about anywhere.
In Winnipeg, police respond to more calls for domestic disturbances than traffic complaints.
It's the only call for service that actually hits double digits.
We completely take these calls serious. They're very serious in nature, very violent. The situations are very volatile.
Calls for service that are domestic related are probably amongst the highest in Canada for any police service.
Here in Winnipeg, that's almost 15,000 calls a year.
Threats, breaches of orders, any sort of assault.
And last year, in less than 5 months, 22 calls came from Camillle Runke.
It just requires more investigation, investigative work to get down to the truth.
Camillle was murdered last October, shot to death outside her work.
You know, domestic violence has been it's been something that's been part of our society for a long time. But as you can see in our talk, there's limitations to what the law will allow without real evidence.
In 2014, 67 women in Canada were killed by their partners or former partners. 11 of those were in Manitoba. It's one of the worst places in Canada for domestic violence.
In Canada, we spend $7.4 billion a year on family violence, domestic violence. That's our court systems, shelters, the police, everybody who has to respond.
Protection orders are supposed to help stop domestic violence. But in 2015, Colleen Silito in Alberta, Anastasia Kuzik in Ontario, and Katie Kwa in BC were all killed, allegedly by men ordered to stay away.
That hasn't worked all that well. We still see situations where women have, 20, 30, 78 breaches of their protection order, and nothing's happening.
In the case of Camillle, she had done everything she could, everything she was supposed to, but it still wasn't enough.
No one could have predicted the outcome here. He had no history of violence at all, and so that really makes it unique for this case, as he went from, being suspected of a lot of mischief and property damage to committing homicide.
I totally knew. And I seemed to be the only one who knew. Everybody else was like, I can't believe he did this. And I was like, of course he did this. Like, there were signs all over the place that he was going to do something.
That's why protection orders were put in place. Who goes out there and dumps nails in front of a person's vehicle? These are not things that normal people do. Police need to look beyond whatever and believe women.
The police say they did believe Camillle, and a week before she was killed, they warned Kevin about his behavior. But charges were never laid. Could you have pressed for those criminal harassment charges sooner?
In hindsight, sure. We could have perhaps. He had no history of violence, so I won't fault our investigators for not pushing it sooner.
He cut her brake lines. Like, are we not taking this a little bit more seriously? And they were like, well, I think he's going to just calm down soon. And nobody believed.
After Camille's murder on October 30th, Kevin was a suspect, but police couldn't find him.
It's just wondering, where is he? Where is he?
While Kevin was on the run, police alerted his former girlfriend, Julia, worried he would come after her.
If he had more than one target on his list, I don't know. I felt fear. I felt pity. I felt like I should have done something for his family, for her.
It may seem strange, but Julia wishes someone was there to help Kevin.
He wanted to keep everything to himself. I think that might have been the biggest problem, was not talking to anyone about it.
He wasn't getting counseling, he wasn't getting help, he wasn't getting thrown in jail. It was just this perfect storm, and I really feel like we could have done something more.
Something more, like arresting Kevin, counseling or monitoring his actions, and enforcing the protection order Camillle had against him.
Err on the side of safety, rather than on the side of thinking that he's just a nice guy and that he's just upset. Well, some of the people that are murdering their loved ones start out just upset.
She was trying to separate from him, and she ended up getting killed. So again, it's not just Cam. We want the laws to change, and if it's gonna take Cam's story to do it, we're gonna do it.
So 16 by 9 went to Manitoba's Minister of Justice to ask him what he's going to do. Does Manitoba have a domestic violence problem?
Society has a domestic violence problem.
Does Manitoba?
Yeah, and Manitoba has disproportionately suffered, and the women and children in this province have disproportionately suffered from domestic violence.
Is that a yes?
Yes.
Now the province is proposing new legislation, further restricting people with protection orders, like a mandatory firearm ban. Guns, like the one Kevin Runke owned. Would this new legislation have changed the situation Camillle experienced?
These changes would have certainly reduced the risk.
How so?
It requires an immediate surrender to make sure that that gun is taken away. The firearm ban in the legislation is a result of the actual experience of Camillle Runke.
I think in Camille's case, it wouldn't have made any difference. You can get a gun just about anywhere. She had a protection order. It wouldn't have made any difference to her being murdered.
Anna wants stronger enforcement of protection orders and breaches taken more seriously.
It's their responsibility. That's, we don't have the manpower to do all the things we do, but we do it. They have a responsibility. These breaches are put in place. It's the law. They need to respond.
Deputy Chief Smythe says they did respond to Camillle, but there was little they could do.
There's limitations to what the law will allow without real evidence. So, there's lots to be considered. That's why I think intervention and prevention programs still have to factor into this, because we can't just respond and arrest our way out of this problem.
The province is also testing out GPS monitoring to track offenders or suspected offenders.
We have right now 8 high-risk domestic violence offenders that are on electronic monitoring.
Kevin might not have qualified as high risk. There was a protection order against him and a charge of mischief, but he didn't have a history of violence. Can you put that on somebody before they've been charged with something?
Well, that would be a constitutional issue for sure, so.
So there are a whole bunch of hiccups here.
There would be a ton of hiccups that would need to be worked out, and even that in and of itself wouldn't necessarily make Camillle safer.
But GPS technology could have helped Camillle gather the evidence she so desperately needed.
I think it's a really good idea, and I think that it needs to be investigated further, and I really think that they can do some wonderful things for victims if they had that. And I really believe that that might have been the only thing that would have saved Cam's life.
Three days after Camillle was murdered, police tracked down Kevin to this road just outside Winnipeg. He was armed.
I won't call it a standoff, but certainly they didn't go chasing in after him. It was a wooded area.
The tactical unit was called in. Kevin drove into the woods and stayed there, inside his truck, with his gun.
They discovered him within the vehicle and deceased, so it would appear he took his own life.
Police say Kevin likely killed himself with the same gun that killed Camillle.
It's 2 lives that are lost. 2 different families that are torn, that are without people that they loved. It affects so many people.
Do you consider this case closed?
Everything led us to believe that Kevin Runke was our main suspect. So we have no other information that would lead us to think anyone else was involved.
We need to get people speaking out about this, and not just speaking out, doing something about it.
Every 5 days in Canada, a woman is killed by her partner or former partner. And with stats like that, there will be more cases to come. Those changes to Manitoba law strengthening protection orders are now in second reading, expected to become law by next month. Still, critics say much more needs to be done to protect women. We'll be right back. There are a lot of things Camillle loved: her truck, her house, her friends. And in 2013, after 6 months of dating, she loved Kevin Runke and married him.
When I first met them, I thought they were a really nice couple. You know, we chit-chat back and forth. He was funny, you know, he would make jokes.
Their first year was really good together. She told me that their first year was, you know, she would probably describe it as magical.
But soon, there were signs. Jen Noon remembers how important home was to Camillle Runke.
She put a lot of work and energy into it, and she made the house her own.
It was her sanctuary, a place she felt safe in. It didn't stay that way for long. Good evening and welcome to 16 by 9. By all accounts, Kevin and Camillle Runke were a couple in love. They got married in 2013 after a whirlwind 6-month courtship in Winnipeg. But when they split last spring, things took a nasty turn, with stories of stalking and harassment. Camillle got a protection order against Kevin, but the law couldn't keep her safe. And last fall, she was murdered. Tonight, we take a closer look at how the system failed her and if the changes one province is making will be enough to keep women safe.
We're gonna be going to Cam's house, like just over the bridge, we call it. I haven't been there since right before she passed away. So it'll be my first time going back. She never would have thought that she needed like a security camera or anything here. Until everything started and everything changed with Kevin. They needed like photographic evidence, any kind of video surveillance that they had to catch him in the act.
It's a tragedy that unfolded like so many others.
I mean, I feel like there was so many things that could have happened, and it just seems like the law doesn't work for the victim.